So now people can hear me. That is just to sex up self-tracking a little bit before we get started. As a side note, one of the YouTube comments, known for how benevolent and kind they are, was, "That's the most agile pedophile I've ever seen." So for those of you who aren't familiar with any of my background, I'll give you a quick backgrounder, and that is I live in San Francisco. I'm very much involved in the startup community, so I'm an investor in companies like Twitter, Facebook. I'm also an advisor to companies like Evernote, StumbleUpon, and between 20 and 25 companies are in my portfolio. Before Our Body, the most recent book, was a 3-year quest, a very obsessive quest, to find the smallest changes in behavior that produced the biggest results. So disproportionately, how could you take the split testing, the A/B testing, the multivariate testing of the startup world and apply it to the human body? And the results were very, very startling. The findings were very, very surprising. And as an example, my dad, who's 65, or at the time was 65 years old, very much overweight. He was 250 pounds at 5'6", which is very, very obese. And he lost more than 90 pounds of fat in less than the span of 1 year and gained 20 to 30 pounds of muscle. And he spent an hour a week in the gym, if not less. So a total of 4 hours per month, hence the title of the book. So I would like to go through some of the findings and to emphasize that this is very, very actionable. The sharing, the collective information is very valuable, but it's also valuable in the here and now. Very small tweaks can produce outrageously large changes. And that's what we'll talk about today. And I'm going to segue to a separate video, which is very different in nature.
Biopsy needle.
Just for comparative purposes?
Yep. It's about the thickness, just a little bit thinner than a pencil.
That's a biopsy needle, roughly the size of a pen. That's the right side of my right thigh. That's my vastus lateralis. So if you're squeamish, you may want to look away. I was recording this with a flip camera as they did this. If you listen carefully, you'll hear something that sounds like Dutch.
That's the depth that we've created.
It's not Dutch. It's Afrikaans. That's the depth of the biopsy needle. This is at the Sports Science Institute of South Africa. And rather than fill out 500 pages of paperwork in the United States, I decided just to go to a fantastic institute in South Africa to do a lot of my testing. And I will explain why after the video is complete. I want you to appreciate, this was one of several hundred experiments that I did on myself, which I do not recommend all of you do. I'll take the bullet.
Relax the leg for me, as far as possible. There we go. You'll just feel that there. All right, and suction. And release. And
so
suction.
druk an is they're creating suction, pulling muscle tissue into this tube and then rotating it to cut off samples.
Here we go.
All right, who wants to sign up?
See that we got? Just take it off.
How was it?
My muscle samples. Yeah, there we go. Thank you. My little Carpaccio stark tartar.
Tim Tartar.
Okay, so these will be used for the enzyme assays.
I'm a strange human being.
Yes.
I'll be the first person to admit it.
We talked about with the graphs. And then that one over there will hopefully be used for the contractility and all that goodness.
This is exactly this.
Okay, so that's enough of my shock and awe campaign. The tissue samples were frozen in liquid nitrogen, and then we did a number of tests, including myography. We looked at the contractility of the fibers and the fiber composition, as well as enzyme composition. Now, why would I do such a thing? I wanted to see if my genetic map was my destiny. This is very important. And I found when I did genetics testing through Navigenics, through 23andMe, the data were good. I want to emphasize that. So both, at least last time I checked, are processed by Illumina in San Diego. So the actual base pairs and so forth, that was accurate. However, when I looked at my actin-3 gene, I had a nonsense allele, and the actin-3 gene codes for fast-twitch muscle fiber. So if you want to be a world-class sprinter, if you want to jump higher, you should have as much fast-twitch muscle fiber as possible. And if you look at people like Ben Johnson, et cetera, they're predominantly fast-twitch muscle fiber. And my results came back, and it said at the top, congratulations, your predisposition is endurance. And it had no exclamation point. It was just a statement. It was very unenthusiastic. And I found out that due to my nonsense allele, I was pretty much screwed. I really didn't have the capacity to develop fast-twitch muscle fiber based on the interpretation. All right? And so how is my endurance? Well, here is a graph of the enzymes that limit endurance in many cases. So if you look at for example, the left is citrate synthase, so forth and so on, how you metabolize fat. Now, the red is a South African antelope, doing pretty well on almost all of these, of course. Endurance athletes, that's blue. And then that straight line at 0 is Homer Simpson. That's the untrained human being. And then the green is Tim Ferriss. So you can see the problem here. I'm apparently screwed for endurance and power. So I was like, well, what could I do? I could be a professional. I could go to amusement parks. I could go on slides. I could play checkers. I seemed pretty much screwed. But then I looked at my muscle fiber composition. And surprise, surprise, something came to light that was very, very curious. Tim Ferriss is red. Now, on the far right, you have my muscle fibers. And type 2A, that's the red, is a fast-twitch muscle fiber. All right, it's fast-twitch oxidative, and you can develop that through training. So the point of these slides, end of that video, is that, and this is emphasized even by the directors of the Human Genome Project, is that your genetics are not deterministic. You can flip switches on and off, just like you would a power box at your house. And there are very simple ways to do that. And they don't require a lot of time. So you see this girl right here. This is a high school girl. Looks pretty normal. She is, from all outward appearances, very normal. This was sent to me by Barry Ross, who is a sprint coach and a track coach in Southern California. And he's produced many, many world champions and broken dozens of world records. He sent this to me to demonstrate the torture twist, which is an exercise for the core. It's a great exercise, but it does suck. That's why it's called the torture twist. And he said, oh, by the way, this girl, who's about 130 pounds, so I don't know, 60 kilos or so, he said she can deadlift, that's pull off the floor, 405 pounds for repetitions, just by the way. And so I said, ooh, all right, after feeling completely emasculated, I wanted to look into the method. And good science is repeatable, all right? And you don't need to be a professional to practice good science. Science is a process. You follow the scientific method. You look at Darwin. You look at Benjamin Franklin. All amateurs. Franklin called his science philosophical endeavors. Came up with some pretty good findings, though, nonetheless. So this type of strength is produced by doing 2 to 3 repetitions of the deadlift to the knees, okay? So I'll demonstrate. Why not? That's it. Picking it up, put it down. Do that 2 or 3 times. Wait 6 minutes. Do it again. And you do 3 sets total, 2 to 3 times a week. And I went from a maximum of about 315 pounds in a pull to 650 some odd pounds in between 8 and 12 weeks. That's for less than 5 minutes of muscle tension per week. And it's very, very repeatable. It is a reliable process. So I'll show you a few other examples. This is... So you can see the tanning and the anti-gravity shorts are optional. All my hair also fell out, so you have to be careful with that when you're lifting weights. I'm kidding. This is the result of a 28-day experiment. I was supervised by a PhD at San Jose State University. I gained 34 pounds of lean muscle tissue, lean body mass in 28 days. I gained 34 pounds in 28 days. And I lost 3 pounds of fat. And I also dropped my cholesterol from 222 to 147 total. Now, I don't think cholesterol, I disagree with the lipid hypothesis of cardiovascular disease, but nonetheless, I wanted to show that it didn't have to be unhealthy. This was also done with less than an hour per week of training. Eating is the hard part, but we'll talk about that a separate time. This exceeds every possible limit in hypertrophy, muscle growth, that you would read in any definitive text. This is Tracy, mother of 2, lest you think it's only for single men. Tracy, mother of 2, lost roughly 120 pounds, and her training consisted of kettlebell swings 2 or 3 times per week for 20 minutes or so per session. And I don't know about you, but I would say that she looks about 20 years younger as well. Lastly, this is someone who had no personal trainer, just a blog post that I wrote, and he lost, this is Patrick, also about 120 pounds. And you can see what a difference that makes. So the guiding tenet for all of this is whenever you find yourself on the side of the majority, it's time to pause and reflect. So the best way, meaning the most effective way, the most efficient way, is seldom what you find in best practices that are widely known. This is as true for ultra endurance, running 50, 100 kilometers, 100 miles, as it is for language learning. I'm going to cover just 4 first principles because it would take far too long to go through the various tactics and details. But these principles are guiding principles that are very flexible, and they can certainly be applied not only to changing your physical body, which is the bedrock of everything else. So as a force multiplier, you can either improve your performance everywhere else, business, relationships, by improving your body, or you can do the opposite. These can also be applied, like I said, to your startups or to your companies. The minimum effective dose in the context of exercise and diet is treating both of those things like a drug. So if someone prescribes you a drug, you're given a specific dose for a specific outcome. If you have less than that dose, you don't get the desired result. More than that dose, and you have side effects. So striving to test by gathering data, which need not be complicated, what the minimum effective dose is. And that can be very, very little. So this is Tracy again at the bottom of a kettlebell swing. And she lost, like I said, 120 pounds. On the right-hand side, you have an example of what I would call a slow-carb meal. And a slow-carb meal, this has become popular among world-class tennis players, among others. There's a big piece on it just in the last few days. Really just eliminates white starches and carbohydrates for a period of 6 days out of every week. It also avoids fruit, which is very controversial because of fructose and how it's converted by the liver. In any case, losing 20 to 30 pounds in a given month, in the first month, is not unusual at all, and that's primarily fat. So here are a few sample meds, all right, minimum effective doses. So 5 minutes, forget about 20 minutes. We're doing 1 set of kettlebell swings, 50 to 75 total repetitions with a maximum weight, 3 times per week, 5 minutes. The second, if you want to lose body fat, it's very, very easy to do. The only change you have to start with, and I always recommend starting with one change, is 30 grams of protein within 30 minutes of waking up. Really easy to remember. You don't have to change anything else. Just change that. My dad went from roughly 5 pounds of average fat loss per month to almost 19 pounds just by making that change. That's the only change. So 30 grams could be a number of hard-boiled eggs. It could be whey protein, as an example. Oh, yes. So the clitoris. Let's talk about the clitoris. 1 to 2 p.m. on the clitoris. This is the reason my book was pulled off the shelves of Costco, by the way, in the United States. I have some very graphic sexual chapters. I'll cover this very briefly, and then it can be homework. Men are pretty clumsy animals, so I like to offer this. Clitoris from the male perspective, 1 to 2 o'clock is where it's going to be most sensitive, all right? So just practice, please. It'll save everyone a lot of grief. 90 to 120 seconds of tension for most muscles. What does this mean? This means that rather than looking at changes in muscle, and believe me, just about everything that you want to change related to your body is going to relate to muscle or fascia, which connect everything. Slow cadence movement, so you take a weight that allows you to reach failure where you can't move any further between 90 and 120 seconds. That means 5 seconds up, much slower than this, 5 seconds down, with maximum weight to failure, once per week, that's it. That's all you need. It's like hitting a microwave 1 minute high for boiling water. That's it. You need the prescription. You don't necessarily need the how-to. And then lastly, about 1,200 words for conversational fluency. This can be applied to other things, all right? Could be applied to viral coefficients. Could be applied to many, many other things. But striving to find the minimum effective dose is very, very important to avoid any type of resource waste. The extremes inform the mean, not vice versa. On the left, you see garden shears. Has anyone here seen the movie Objectified? Anyone? Okay, we have a few people. I highly recommend that everyone else see this movie, Objectified. It was created by the filmmaker who produced Helvetica, about the type font. It's a wonderful movie about design in everyday life. And Frog Design, I know we have Frog Design here, is featured at one point because a client comes in to discuss with them garden shears. And they say, well, a client might come in and say, our average user is a middle-aged woman. She's this height, this weight, this many years old. And the response from Frog Design was, we don't care about your average user. We want the extreme use cases. And if we can account for those extreme use cases, let's say paraplegic and then maybe a bodybuilder who can't brush his own teeth because his arms are too big, whatever those might be, once you solve for those extreme use cases, the middle takes care of itself, all right, in many cases, but not vice versa. And an example from one of my experiments, I didn't have video of this because I was too occupied, but you can see a number of syringes there. I flew stem cell growth factor over from Israel, combined that with human growth hormone, actually technically IGF-1, along with many other things, including a base of my own blood. This is very interesting. I had my blood taken out, and then it was spun in a special centrifuge to take out all of the growth factors, concentrated, and then used as a base for this cocktail. And then this was injected locally into sites of injury, whether that was dislocations I'd had, surgeries I had, and I was able to reverse about 95% of my so-called permanent injuries in the span of 6 months. I don't recommend that you do that necessarily, but I did find that using prolotherapy, which is simply sugar water, in effect, dextrose in a saline solution, could achieve 9 out of 10 times the same effect. And that is something that I would encourage people who have, let's say, tennis elbow to actually look into. Tracking and loss aversion is more important than how-to. So I recall once in Silicon Valley, a very good friend of mine, I won't mention him by name, but the CEO of a very well-known company said, look, I don't want the story, I'm really busy. He said, look, I just want to lose abdominal fat, I want a six-pack, give me the index card with the bullet points of what I need to do. Okay, sure. So I gave him the index card, and I did the same thing for about a half a dozen CEOs, and the success rate was 0. The success rate was 0 because giving a prescription, the how-to, isn't enough. You need to set yourself up from a behavioral psychological standpoint to failure-proof the change that you want. It's very easy to explain what I mean by that. Tracking will beat a prescription. So if you were to take, and this is very true if you look at the research of BJ Fogg at the Stanford Persuasion Lab as an example, or just about anywhere else, if you were to take 2 groups, all right, so here's group A, right down the aisle, group B. All right, group A, you guys all get personal trainers, all right, but you have to wander into your local gym and find a personal trainer. And then group B, all I want you to do, let's assume we're talking about fat loss, is take your iPhone or your smartphone, take a photograph of every meal before you eat it, every snack before you eat it, every drink before you drink it. This group, I vote, will have more success, more compliance, and more ultimate fat loss. And tracking, when you look at it, is what to account for. And that's called the FLASH diet, which I'll cover in a second. Loss aversion is very important. We're very keen, at least in the United States, we like to focus on positive psychology and positive reinforcement, rewards, game dynamics that reward us. And I would offer, at least if you look at the literature, that shame, humiliation, all of these things are very, very powerful. In fact, more so than the first group, and you should use those. It's a fact. Not liking it isn't going to change it, so you may as well leverage it to your advantage. And the way you can do that is by using bets. So let's say a small wager among 4 people, 5 people who each contribute money. That's how Tracy lost her 120 pounds. Or it could be something as simple as a public display, public accountability, using a wiki for that. And I've seen this used for people who could never lose weight, never gain weight. Using that public accountability all of a sudden produces an incentive to change your behavior. If you don't do your job at your job, you get fired. If you don't do your job and you fail on a diet, typically nothing happens. So if anybody out there wants to design a gym, here's what I'd recommend. And this is based on Yale research, is you charge everyone $400 a month, and then for every visit to the gym, they get 25 back. And if they don't hit their goals after 3 months, when they sign up, they give you photographs of themselves in their underwear. And you put them on the internet after 3 months, if they don't hit their goals. That will be the fittest gym you have ever seen in your life. All right, so the general rules of behavioral change that I would encourage you to keep in mind, you can make them very complicated, but looking at the data set and the data sets that I have, and we're talking about thousands of people over several years, these are the points that I would remember. Number 1 is make it conscious. You have to be conscious of decisions that you're making subconsciously if you want to change them. So the FLASH diet, which I mentioned, which has been studied at University of Wisconsin, it's been studied in London, is more effective than a food journal. And what's important to note is that people who use food journals lose 3 times as much weight as those who don't. And it's a hell of a lot easier just to take a photograph. There's a good application called Diet Snaps that you could use to make it even easier. Before pictures, so if you look at the transformation challenges of the last 20 years, like the Body for Life challenge, typically rewarding $1 million, Lamborghini, whatever it might be. The diet varies, the training varies. The winners almost always use before photographs to make the pain painful enough, all right? You don't have to make those public. You can put them on your refrigerator or your dog's forehead, wherever you'll see it frequently. Number 2 is make it a game. So Peter Drucker has said, very famous management theorist, what gets measured gets managed. And I would certainly agree with that. 5 sessions, if you look at the Nike Plus device, what they found is to make a behavior stick, you have to log 5 sessions. It doesn't matter if they're 5 minutes long or 5 hours long, so rig the game so you can win. If you're going to go to the gym, you want to make that habit, 5 sessions, keep them really short. 5 to 10 minutes, doesn't matter. Lastly, make it competitive, like I mentioned, and then make it small and temporary. So not only the MED, but a 2-week trial. That's how I got my dad started after he'd failed many other diets in the past. And last but not least, keep improvement relative. So it's about becoming the best you can become, in the process creating data that can help many other people. It's not about being the best in the world, and in this case, the biggest guy in the world. So keep it relative. Small changes can have huge impacts. It doesn't have to be hard. It doesn't have to be complicated. Just take it one step at a time. And alles mit Maß und Ziel. Measurement and objective. I'll leave you with that. Thank you.
Where should we sit? Should we sit on
So, Tim, we've got just under 15 minutes, which is almost long enough for us to induce a non-stop orgasm in the crowd. Just a bit of time to ask a bit about your process. So how long did you spend experimenting? And how much have you kept up?
So I spent, for the book, it was a 3-year process. I've been gathering data since about age 16. So actually I have almost every workout I've done recorded since age 16. I still have all of those. So if I want to look like I did in any given point in time, minus the hair, I'm still haven't figured that out, then I just have to look to the 4 weeks prior to that photograph and I can reproduce it. In terms of how much I've kept up, I really only track when I have a specific goal and in mind. I don't track for the sake of tracking, which some people do, and I don't find that to be a bad thing. It's just not my personal path. So I was at the very first Quantified Self meetup at Kevin Kelly's house in Pacifica, and some people they've tracked their emotions, thoughts for 20 years in text files. Typically for me, I want to improve cognition a certain way, acquire language, finish a race, whatever it might be. So at this point in time, the only thing that I'm tracking is my response to different types of folate. So for example, L-methylfolate versus regular folic acid, to see if I can improve my methylation. So there's a gene, this doesn't have to get too complicated. You'll remember this gene. This gene is the MTHFR gene, but coaches call it the motherfucker gene. And they call it the motherfucker gene because if you have a bad variant of the MTHFR, it means that you don't recover as quickly. So your B vitamin metabolism is screwed up. And that conversation that I first had about this, the MTHFR, with Raymond Macaulay of Illumina, ended up being an article in Nature magazine, which is pretty cool. So I only track a few things at a time, and typically when I have a goal.
And you seem pretty fit now, but if you're not working out as solidly, how much have you lost?
So the mass side of things is the hardest, because you have to make eating a full-time job, and that's really miserable. This is about my right weight. The microphone that I had on before was pulling down my pants because I've lost about, I'd say 10 kilos in the last 20 days. About 50-50 fat and muscle because I'm going to be training for an ultramarathon. So I want to give my knees a break by being lighter. So at this point, it's to maintain my stasis really only takes 10-15 minutes a week, typically with kettlebells and deadlifts.
Not really a competitive type of guy.
Yeah, no, not at all.
And what was the riskiest thing you did in the whole process?
The riskiest thing I did was probably a number of the injections to reverse injuries. One of them included something called bone morphogenic protein number 9. And one of the risks of BMP is that it can fuse bone, it can fuse vertebra. And I had it injected up and down my cervical spine. So I would say that was probably, in retrospect, not something that I would recommend. In terms of accidents, the only real severe accident that happened was from a very routine injection in the elbow, and it was a botched injection. So even if you disinfect the skin, this is just a side note, if the skin is thick, as it is on the elbow, you have to inject laterally. In this case, they injected through the thick part of the skin, pushed bacteria into the joint, and I had what's called a MRSA infection in my joint, had to have emergency surgery and go to the ER and so forth. That's also something I would not recommend.
It's a very compelling, entertaining read. It's not really a self-help book as you know them, but what can people here do to notice in a month a transformation, both in their mood, in their physical appearance?
So a few of the small, very, very small changes that I'd recommend people consider experimenting with. Number one would be the 30 grams of protein within 30 minutes of waking up. For losing fat, honestly, you're not going to find anything easier. Second would be if you feel fatigued in the mornings, certainly get a ZO if you can and look at your ratio of REM sleep to total sleep. But very often, I implanted a continuous glucose monitor in my side used by type 1 diabetics for 3 weeks, and I tracked everything and correlated it to a meticulous food journal and so forth. But you don't have to do any of that. If you suspect that your fatigue could be due to low blood sugar, just have 2 tablespoons of almond butter if you can get it, or peanut butter, which would be a far second choice, but you could do organic peanut butter before you go to bed. And people will oftentimes notice a very big difference there. Thirdly, I would say, I think sleep and sex are really important for quality of life, so I focus on the 1 to 2 p.m. and read the chapter on 15 minutes. I think that would do everybody a lot of good.
Will you be my personal trainer?
I will be your text-based personal trainer.
I mean, the sex chapter has got a lot of interest, and this headline phrase, the 15-minute orgasm, that must have been a tough research job.
Yeah, you know, I had to sacrifice myself for science, and sometimes you really need to make your sacrifices for the betterment of mankind.
Are there any people here who have tried this research experiment, and does it work?
There we go.
I've received more positive feedback on the fat loss and the sex than anything else. Honestly, I mean, it's been really gratifying. And if you want to take a look for yourself. The only reason that I find writing books very, very painful and difficult. But what social media has allowed is a fantastic feedback loop. And that's why I continue to write, despite how difficult I find it to be. And I mean, if you look on Twitter at @tferriss with 2 R's and 2 S's, you can see dozens and dozens of people who are self-reporting on a daily basis. And I'm hoping at one point, and I will do this, to gather the data specifically as it relates to diabetics, because we've already seen type 1 diabetics who've been able to reduce their fast-acting insulin by 50%, 75%, which is astonishing, and that will extend lifespan.
I just want to ask you about some of the devices that are now on the market to help us track and get your opinion of it. So, you know, one of the things I'm using is this little thing called a Fitbit, which is telling me I've done 4,087 paces. It's got a very sensitive accelerometer, and you can set it to know how long you're sleeping. Worthwhile?
I think it's worthwhile for people who want simplicity and who have a lot of weight to lose. I don't actually believe that tracking calories is the best metric for fat loss or muscle gain. And in fact, you know, I've consumed almost 7 times my resting metabolic rate and still lost body fat at the same time, just to show that what you eat, that's calories in, is not necessarily limited to then calories out as exercise. You also have heat, you have how you can manipulate hormones, you have certainly excretion. You know, if you don't digest it, it doesn't count. And so there are a lot of ways to modify it, but I do think it's a very simple device, and typically simple works better than complex, even if the metric isn't ideal. So I like Fitbit, but I don't use it personally.
All right. So just so you know, I'm not looking to lose weight. I did ask Monique if I could have a picture of myself in shorts in my presentation. This is something that a French company, Things, has just put on the market. It plugs into your iPhone, measures your blood pressure. It's pretty effective.
Yeah.
Should we be buying these sorts of things?
I think that blood pressure is fascinating to track for a whole host of different reasons, as is body temperature, actually, for any type of fatigue or overtraining, which can happen from too much work as well. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that the more fascinated people become by this type of self-discovery, the better off we will be as individuals and collectively. I think the caveat is don't try to track too much in the beginning, because if you have a mountain of data that you collect, and data by itself, I'll just use this singular here, data by itself is not valuable. I think data, bits and bytes, a fire hose of numbers is not in itself useful. To make that information something you can act upon, I really think that it's important to keep the question, is this actionable, in mind.
Okay, so beyond the physical metrics, what about the brain? I mean, there are these devices. This is called a mind wave that's just come on the market for about 100 and something euros, about $100. Put it on and we'll see. It's got a little sensor at the front.
Oh, that's my prefrontal?
It measures 2 things based on your frontal lobe.
How am I doing?
It measures your concentration and your relaxation. And then if it works, we get a visualization. So if it's found you.
Yeah, there I am.
So red means you're stressed, and as it goes green and yellow, it means you're getting more relaxed. Okay, let me.
How am I doing? Looks like my screensaver.
So you've just had a sexy thought, I think. But these are just starting to go mainstream, and the premise is soon there'll be little sensors that will know what kind of mood you're in and tip you off.
Yeah, I think that these types of devices are fantastic. Even something as supposedly primitive as a biofeedback machine can be very useful. And you have to be very aware of your variables if you're using something like this. So, for example, I know that I'm a caffeine fast metabolizer, and I had half a cup of coffee, so probably about 80 milligrams of caffeine about 45 minutes ago. So I would say it's like halfway diminished through my bloodstream. But assuming you control your variables, yeah, I would use this in a heartbeat. I love this kind of stuff. I mean, I was back in the day in a former life, a neuroscience major for a brief period of time. So I think this is fantastic. I also think the Zeo is a fantastic way to look at your mental performance.
So we're going to do a scientific experiment by getting this guy drunk in a bit, about 10 minutes, and we're going to measure
Just
again.
a side note for you guys on who may be fans of Ambien. One of the preliminary observations that we've made with dozens of people who are using the Zeo, who are also using Ambien, is that when they use Ambien, they definitely get to sleep faster, but they have dramatically reduced deep sleep. So the physical restorative sleep rather, is cut by 80, 90% in some cases. So good to be aware of that if you're a constant user.
Should we be taking certain medication to improve our thinking?
I would say no. I would say treat food as medicine, and you'll find that you can improve your cognitive performance by addressing deficiencies more effectively than by taking the stronger popular drugs. So if you were to look at, let's say, Ritalin, methylphenidate, so that affects the prefrontal cortex, that would have definitely been a confounding variable. You find it works, it does work. Adderall works as well, but there are some really severe consequences. Modafinil, which is Provigil, very popular among CEOs in Silicon Valley. You can bet your ass that that has some serious side effects. And people believe it doesn't, but typically there's an side effect correlation. And I think that those are pretty short-sighted in many cases. But if you do, let's say, an analysis, there's a lab in the US called SpectraCell. And I was able to identify selenium deficiency, fix that just by eating Brazil nuts, and I almost tripled my testosterone and doubled my sperm count in less than 3 months. I mean, the spermatogenesis cycle is about 60 some odd days. To give another example, I did a very complete fat analysis, fatty acid analysis, and I had a deficiency of myristic acid. What the hell is myristic acid? Well, turns out it's found in coconut oil, among other things. Started taking just like a half a tablespoon of coconut oil in the morning and at night. Don't eat coffee anymore. It's astonishing. So that would certainly be considered a cognitive enhancer. For me.
One last question. A lot of people have come in here long distance. How do we cope with jet lag?
Jet lag. Well, I would say a few things. See, jet lag, there's the long, painful way to do it, which is by cycling protein and carbohydrates and fasting and all of that. This is a case where I do use a supplement. So I think it may be difficult to get in Europe, sadly, but in the US it's quite easy. Melatonin. So when you arrive at your destination, at your appointed sleep hour, I typically take 6 to 9 milligrams of melatonin. And
side effects?
That will correct. I haven't noticed too many side effects. I have a hypothesis that I don't think I can prove at this point. So it will fix your jet lag. The only side effect is you can wake up early. And my hypothesis is that because it affects the suprachiasmatic nucleus and your sensitivity to light signals for circadian rhythm, but it's a sample size of 1 at this point, so I can't prove that.
Fantastic. Everybody go and buy 4-Hour Body. Next year, you'll look like the Charles Atlas after, and you'll have fantastic sex. Thank you.
All right, thanks everybody. Thank you.